I was honored to virtually sit down with Jane Straw, a professional comic book inker. Take everything you think you know about inking and throw it out the window. My eyes have been opened, and I have a brand new respect for the role. Here's the interview. All right, so hey everybody, welcome to one of our events we have at Storycomic is Storycomic Presents, and here I'm honored and humbled to be virtually in the same room here with my good friend and cousin-in-law, right,
Yes.
Jane Straw of the Ink Pages.
Hi.
And so with the introductions, I would say that when I found out that my wife's cousin was a professional inker, the first conversation, the first thing that I did was, I remember when we were talking, is I was like, why inking? Because when you for those that
Yeah.
are listening or watching at home, it's when you open up a comic book, you'll have the writer, you have the artist, and then you'll have there's layouts, there's all kinds, but then inking was the big one. And for some of the people, some of my Gen Xer friends would know the big joke about inking was from the movie Chasing Amy, where where Brody, oh, what's his character? Was it Brody? Was the character Jason Lee's
I
character?
never actually
Anyway,
watched it, but
you've
I've
never
heard
watched
the
Chasing Amy.
no,
You must have
no.
heard you must have
I've
heard it when you
heard.
tell
Oh yeah.
people. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I've heard it.
So I mean, one
Oh,
one
that's
one
funny.
point was one point was that they were, what the one guy was the one that drew the pictures, and the other one was the
Yeah.
inker. And the joke, and the joke was like, all you do is
Famous T
trace.
word.
Yes, yeah, the famous T word. Yes, and and needless to say, I hope I'm not taking away all your thunder by saying is that, well, needless to say, there is a lot to do with inking. Inking gives it depth, it gives it shadow, it gives it all kinds of stuff.
Oh
So
yeah.
so talk to us, talk to us about it. Talk to us about, first of all, how did you get into doing what you're doing now?
Into comics in general.
Yeah, start with comics in
Yeah.
general, then we'll
Okay.
dive into your passion for
Yeah.
the inking arts.
Yeah. So I got into comics because I wanted to tell story. That's the long and short of it. But basically, when I was a kid, me and my brothers, we would come up with stories. And these were ideas for film, for cartoons, for games. Not really comics, though.
Hmm.
But it's something we always grew up with. And when I came back to the UK in 2006, I was like, okay, what am I going to do career-wise? And I considered things like graphic design, fashion design, and children's book illustration. But a part of me was like, yeah, it'd be a shame if you don't get to tell your stories, you know? So I was like, comics. I don't need to go to school to do comics. I can just sit at home, start writing, start drawing. I didn't need to go to any university for any degree. So for me, it was perfect. So I went to my first comic convention, which my younger brother told me about. So I went there, I got to meet some professionals. And at the time, I had been looking for courses in the UK, specifically London, that taught comics, and I could find only one. But when I went to the convention, I met lots of the professionals, and one of them there, he was doing a 10-week course, and it was about the same price as at the college. So I kind of thought, well, this is a guy who's in the industry, he's already working in the industry. It's probably better to attend his course than to go to a college because I don't know the credentials of the people at the college. So I chose him and did the course. And after we finished, I hung around. I would continue going back to the studio. I would show him my artwork, and we would just chat and talk. And then he had a project he wanted me to work on as an inker, because he felt inking was my core strength, and agree with him. I have to agree. So I started on that project as inker, but the penciler had to go back to China. So I took over doing pencils and ink. So that was my first comic. It is a graphic novel, actually. And that was published in 2010. And then after that, I went to a convention, and Marvel and DC were going to be there doing portfolio reviews. And this was the first time, to my knowledge, that they were going to be in the UK. So I was like, I'm not missing this opportunity. So I went along, I dropped off my portfolio. What you had to do is you drop off your portfolio with your phone number, and they'll give you a call if you've got potential. So I dropped it off, but because I was hoping for a call, I didn't attend a panel that was taking place about what editors and publishers want in a portfolio. Instead, a friend of mine who also works in comics, he attended, and he sort of gave me some feedback on what they're looking for. And I was just like, I have none of that in my portfolio. I was just like, yeah, I'm not ready. So I kind of thought, oh, dang it. Like, okay, so because I submitted as a penciler, and I was just like, yeah, because of my previous experience, like after the first comic I did, I was supposed to do another comic, and it just didn't work out, and I ended up pulling out. And when I was doing that comic, I just felt like penciling comics, I don't enjoy it as much as I thought I would, but I love inking comics. So I was kind of like, you know, for me to be a penciler in comics, there's a lot I need to learn still. Perspective, lighting, drawing things like buildings and cars, and all that sort of architectural stuff. It's just not something I had drawn up to this point. So I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna go and do inking because I'm strong at inking. I know I can, that's probably a faster way for me to get in the industry than doing pencils. So I decided to concentrate on that. And as it turned out, years later, because the plan was I would ink and I would learn all the stuff I needed to do the penciling. Turns out my penciling went down to practically zero. I was hardly drawing at all throughout the whole time. And this was quite a few years. This was 2012. I made that decision and started working on my inking. So yeah, I went on DeviantArt, found some pencils, specifically sequential, so that's the interior pages, and I started inking them. And I got my portfolio together for the next convention, which was the first, I think it was the first London Supercon, and that's the one where Stan Lee came. And I showed my work to a lot of professionals at the convention, and they were actually really complimentary about my inks, which was fantastic. Got some feedback, went away. So since then, I've been focusing on inking. It is my core strength, to be honest. I feel like it's something that was always in me. I've always been very precise with my artwork. Even going back to when I was living in Nigeria, my paintings would be super precise and clean. So it just lent itself when I started inking. So yeah, I've been inking since then. Last year, I got my first major gig with a publisher, or I should say my first gig with a major publisher, which was Dark Horse. I inked 2 comics for them, which was 8 comics, 8 issues each. One was Halo Lone Wolf, and the other was Alien Rescue. And finished that, and now I'm inking for another publisher based, I think, in Germany. So that's what I'm currently doing. So that's how I got into inking. Yeah.
So for any of the viewers or listeners out there who might have never picked up a comic or hasn't picked up a comic in years,
Mm.
what is the difference between the drawing and the inking? What does the inker bring to a comic book?
All right. So the penciler it's sort of like the name, or rather the title tells you what they do. So a penciler, he pencils the artwork. He literally uses a pencil, so hence the name. But if you've ever drawn anything, you know that when you pencil something, it's very rough. There's a lot of construction lines, a lot of sketch lines, and all that, which you can't really take to a printer and get it published. It's not going to look good. So the inker would come in and using ink, they would basically trace. They would trace over the lines to produce a clean black and white copy. But of course, there's a lot more to it than tracing. You really do have to, first of all, you have to be confident. I think um, not a lot of people, but I do often get this comment from artists that they're very nervous about inking because they're afraid that, once you put that line down, it's permanent. It's not like a pencil, you can erase it. So a lot of the times they're nervous about putting inks down. Um, and yeah, because if you put a wrong line down, you can ruin your inking. And not all pencilers are actually good at inking. So this is where the inker comes in, and they will clean up the line work, they will embellish it, they will add the depth, yeah, clean it up, make it look pretty, and produce that black and white copy. And that is what then goes to the colorist, and they fill in the colors. So that's basically it. But inking has a long history, and I sent you some samples. So back in the day, back in the day, Incas had a different title, and it was called the finisher.
Okay.
And that's because the pencils were often little more than layouts. So the process for creating a comic is you do your layouts, and that's sort of the planning stage. You're planning the composition of your page, where you're going to put everything, how you want your panels to look, what's going to take place in the panels. That's all sort of thought out during the layout stage. And then based on that, the pencil will now flesh that out into the pencils. But during the early history of comics, the pencils would be very loose, and they would be not much more than what you get at the preliminary layout stage. And that's what they would send to the inker. And the inker would literally have to they would basically have to finish the penciler's art. So if you want to show the examples, then, here's a good place to do it. Let me just get my notes as well.
So I have a friend that Nay Ruth was asking, does the inker ever redraw also? Do they ever
Yes.
go back in? Okay.
Well, redraw as in if a penciler has done something wrong, like it's sort of expected that the inker will fix it.
Okay.
That was actually quite common. It's probably less so now, and you'll discover why as we go through it, because the modern pencilers are a lot tighter with their artwork, and you'll see that in the samples I sent over.
So which one do you want me to pull up?
Well, if we look at the first samples I sent, and this is from Neil Adams, who's, a legend in the industry.
Right.
And if you look at those samples, you can kind of see the kind of pencils that an inker would typically get. And it's very rough. There's not a lot of background detail and stuff like that.
All right, let me share this to their viewers to see this here. I think
Yeah.
it's I think it's this is the one you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay.
That's yeah, that's the kind of pencils that an inker would get.
Okay.
And as you can see, there's not a lot of detail that's going on, and it's also very rough. You know, if you look at his cape in the last panel, you know,
It's really
it's not
rough.
a whole lot of
So let me. So you bring up the point of finding pencils. What do you mean by that? What does it mean when you say where would you find? Where would you find? It's basically finding a an original, but maybe not as an original copy of pencil work that you would practice on.
No, you just go online.
Okay.
I was on DeviantArt at the time, and lots of artists were on there. So I would find pencils that really appealed to me or that met the requirement of the portfolio. And I would ask permission from the pencil, like, do you mind if I ink this for my portfolio? And most of the times they'll say yes, they don't have a problem with you doing that for your portfolio. So it's a good resource, you know, if you want to find artwork. If you know artists, you can always ask them if you can practice on their pencils. And it's always a good idea if you are doing a portfolio, you want a variety of pencil styles. So you can go for something more cartoony or something more serious, you know, to show an editor or publisher your range and your ability to adapt to different pencilers. It's quite important as well.
So, but is there a way as anchors kind of grow in their field, do they start having specialties, much like how pencilers kind of have a specialty and like I prefer doing this style of art? Do inkers start to also create a a specialty? And as like you said, some people might lean more heavy into the cartoony look. Some people might lean more
Mhm.
heavily into the superhero genre.
It's a good question where Incas are concerned. It's not actually one that I've asked any Incas. I personally feel like as an Inca, you need to be versatile, but I know that there are Incas that get attached to certain pencilers. If you look at duos like Greg Capullo, Jonathan Galpian, they're always working together.
Hmm.
So you do often get inkers who are attached to specific pencilers, and that's because sometimes you know they know what the penciler wants. You also have to take that into consideration. They're familiar with the penciler. They know how to bring out the best of that penciler and also what that penciler wants and likes in inks. So you do find there are some pencilers that do get attached to specific pencilers, but I'm not sure if you get pencilers that only specialize in more cartoony styles or more serious styles. I do know that you know some pencilers suit other styles better. It's just there's a variety of inkers and the way they approach the ink, so you can kind of you know a good editor will be able to see your inks and decide you would be a good fit for this particular
Hmm.
pencil or this particular style of pencilers. You know, it's their job to be able to know that stuff.
So in a
Yeah.
way too, it's kind of interesting. So that anchors can be attached to multiple pencilers, where a penciler might say, "Hey, I like this inker. I want to stick with this inker," but that doesn't mean that inker has to be solely stuck to that penciler. They might have three or four different pencilers that they
Yeah,
connect pretty well with.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I also feel like I know as an inker myself that I like to switch up my pencilers because, you know, just to keep things fresh, you know,
Mm.
it can become, it's interesting. Like when you ink one person, you begin to learn their style and you begin to sort of learn how to approach their pencils. But I also like switching it up, going from penciler to penciler. And I personally, I kind of feel like as an inker, you want to be adaptable. You want to have a style that will match any penciler. So it doesn't matter who the penciler is, you have the ability to give them what they want. And I
That's
think that's important as an inker.
Wow, yeah, that's amazing. When now that the more you're talking about it, the more I realize that that's, as a penciler, you have to proactively, if you want to change your style, you have to proactively go out and do that. Whereas an
Mm,
inker, you're able to, you have that ability, and that ability to connect with another penciler, to then, as you say, you don't become stagnant in your style. Because if, like
yeah.
you said, if you stick to one penciler, you're going to end up being stagnant, and then you're not going to be able to change much of some of the methods, or some of the ways that you might be able to,
Hmm.
carry some lines. But then
Yeah.
trying and connecting to other pencilers, that's interesting. I never thought about
Yeah, and I feel like when you have different pencilers, and this is why there's more to inking than just tracing, because I remember the first few artworks that I inked for my first portfolio, they were terrible. In retrospect, they're like, oh my goodness. But I came across one penciler who I really liked his style, and he had a very particular style. And so when it came to inking him, I had to think like, okay, how do I approach this? How do I sort of translate what he's put down on paper? Because I'm sure you're aware that in a lot of comics, when you do that gradient from black to white, you have what they call feathering. So they do that with the feathering, which is like a thick line to a thin line, and they're all parallel and neat, tidy, and all that. But his pencils were different. He didn't have any of that, but he did have that gradient. So I was kind of feeling like, okay, how can I translate this? How do I capture that graduation of dark to light? And I kind of mulled on it for an hour or two, and then I decided, okay, well, what if I use my pen as if it's a pencil?
it.
And that sort of, from there, I developed my first style, as it were, in inking. And again, when I did my first comic for Halo, they wanted a very gritty style to it, a lot of texture. And my work was very clean and crisp. There wasn't a lot of texture going on. So doing that one, it's like, okay, well, how can I incorporate texture? What do I do? And that's when I included ink wash, which is something that I hadn't done before. I think I did it on one page before on someone else's artwork, but now I had to do it for 4 issues, and it's like, okay, that gave me the opportunity to do ink wash and experiment with it, and learn that technique, which I'd never done before. And then on the second comic, which was Aliens, is the same penciler, but the client wanted a completely different style of inking, which again was completely different to what I'd done before. Well, I mean, I'd done something similar before, but not like this. So again, I got the opportunity. I was like, well, for the style they want, I can't use my usual tool, which is a fine liner. Let me just grab one. So I would normally use a fine liner pen, just like one of these. And
Okay.
it's just like for the style that they want, I can't use this. Like, there is no way. Like, I would burn through that. Like, this wouldn't last me 2 panels for the style they wanted. It wouldn't last me 2, 3 panels. So I was like, okay, I need a new tool. And the tool I chose was the nib, which I had never used before. Let me,
Oh, that's from the old art school days. Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
I tried using it years ago and I hated it.
Yeah.
But now it's like, okay, I have to use it. Like, I am forced. Like, I don't have a choice anymore. So I started by, and also, if you are starting with nibs, like, nobody told me this, but if you want to get into nibs, here's a tip. you need to experiment. You actually need to go through a whole load of nibs to find one that suits you.
Right.
Because if you just pick up the first nib you have and try using it, you're not going to like it. It's not going to suit you. You actually have to experiment. And I went through so many nibs trying to find one that I felt comfortable with. I finally did. And then I inked all 4 issues with a nib, which was like achievement unlocked the moment. It was like, damn, okay. But again, that's a new tool now that I can use. So when you change pencilers and you have new, you've got to figure out how to ink this person, it does help you in terms of trying new things and developing new techniques and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
So again, it's a question popped up is how long does it take you to ink a page?
Ooh, loaded question. Yeah. It takes me like it does take me longer than it should. Um I'm just trying to think. Like it can take me 2 days to ink a single page, but ideally, once you get with a major publisher, like that's not good enough. Like it is not good enough. Don't try it. No. When I did Halo and Aliens, I think I had to do 20 pages in 4 weeks. And at
Wow.
first I was like, nah. But when you got a deadline, you'll get it done. So, and that, it's kind of it's known in the industry when you work for a publisher, say goodbye to your social life. Just forget it. Weekends, holidays, meeting up with friends, like forget it. But again, it depends on the penciler because some pencilers are a lot more detailed than others. So it can take like 8 to 12 hours to ink a page if you were to do it straight. I often get distracted, so it takes me longer. But at the same time, it can also take 12 to 18 hours to ink a page. It really does depend. It's a wide range, but ideally, you need to be as fast as possible. Some economics for you now. If you're earning $50 a page, and it takes you 2 days to ink that page, then you're earning $25 a page. But if it can take you 1 day to ink a page, you've just earned double. So the faster you are, the better. And I know a friend of mine, I had to do some fill-in pages for her. And they sent me, I think, 5 pages. This was for IDW. I did some fill-in pages for a Back to the Future issue. And they sent me, I think, like 5 pages on maybe a Thursday. And the editor was like, yeah, we need it on Monday. And I'm just like, I can't do that. like, no way. I was working at the time as well. So it's just, it's not like I had a full day to myself to do that. I had a day job to go to as well. But I asked her, like, is this for real? And she was like, she's clocking 5 pages a day. And I'm like, like, oh boy. No, you do not want to, you're not a colorist. You don't want to spend like a day doing 5 pages as an inker. It did show in her ink. Like when I received it, I was like, this is not her normal ink. Like it's usually a lot nicer than this. And then she
Right.
told me it's 5 pages a day. I'm like, oh, okay, that's fine. I'll let you off the hook.
So another question for you, Jane. Now,
Yeah.
because this is the day of digital media and all that
Yeah.
stuff. How many do you know in your line of work? How many people still use actual pen and paper, and how many people now digitally ink their work?
Oh, I don't know. I can't say like how many people still do traditional and how many do digital. Like you need a survey of inkers to be able to answer that. But I do know that, you know, a lot more pencilers are going digital. I do know that there are inkers who ink digitally and they produce beautiful work. Well, maybe not famously, but I know that Brian Bolland, for example, he inks digitally. I met him at a convention a few years ago, and he was like, "Yeah, he's all digital now," and I was just like, "What? Like, not even I'm digital." But yeah, he does it digitally now. And I think Jonathan Galpian, who inks Batman, I think a few years ago, he also went digital. So I do know more inkers are going digital. I'm not there yet. I still do it traditionally, and yeah, I don't know how many more. I'm trying to think. Like, yeah, I mean, when you go to the conventions, yeah, you still do see a lot of traditional inking. It still happens, but also because of digital, you now have more pencilers inking their own stuff, and it's sort of a debate, like for the, you know, it's had an impact on the inking
Okay.
industry for sure, for
But I
sure.
mean, similarly speaking, I have a friend that does lettering, and that's now that there's fonts for pretty much everything, that he sees there's been a pretty substantial drop in actual people that are actually hired to do lettering now. Not necessarily the lettering, not doing the lettering, but putting in the bubbles and stuff. That's still, people
Yeah,
still do that as a finishing piece, because there is an
yeah,
art form to actually creating the bubbles
mm,
and actually having the spacing between the words and whatnot.
yeah.
But he has
Okay.
seen that hand lettering has dropped off significantly. You don't see that much anymore.
Yeah, I know it's quite rare to see hand lettering. I know, like, I've come across a few people that still do it hand lettered. I remember years ago when I was working as an editor, I visited Titan Comics, and they they had um, they had acquired the rights to publish a European comic, and they were sort of having, and you know, I kind of looked at the work and I was like, you know, the bubbles, like you'd have a bubble with very little text in it,
Mm.
and it's like, why don't you just adjust the bubble to fit more nicely around the text? And he was like, because it's hand it's hand lettered, they can't, it's in the artwork. Like if you pick that person's page, you'll see that they've actually, the penciler has drawn in the bubbles. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
part of the artwork, it's not something you can remove. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's very interesting. So I think there are some artists probably in the European comic scene who perhaps still do it traditionally, which is quite interesting. But
Hmm.
yeah, that's largely digital now.
Right. So I want to look at some of the things you sent over. I wanted to share with some of our viewers here. The specifically some of these Wonder Woman panels. Do you want to talk to us about some of these?
Yeah, the Wonder Woman panels are, um, these are examples of traditional, no, not traditional, of digital pencils. And this is by Marcos Santucci.
Okay.
Santucci. I always get the surname wrong. Um, I met him again years ago, and um, I was basically commissioned to turn these pages into traditional inks for clients
Okay.
because they were all digital. As a digital, this is the sort of con of being a digital artist, that you don't have traditional pages that you can actually sell on to collectors. So
Okay.
I was hired to ink these traditionally for clients. But these are examples of digital pencils. And you can see that with someone who is working digitally, even if they're not an inker, they don't need an inker because the art they produced is already black and white, you know,
Right.
and that's the function of the inker essentially. But if the penciler is working digitally, they really don't need the inker. So
But I know that, but there's some aspects of it that you'll need to add some weight to some of the lines,
yeah,
or add some illusion of light source
yeah.
and all that other parts. And as you said, like cross hatching, that doesn't come when somebody just, you know, so there is more to the inking piece than just making the lines heavier.
Well, I would say there was back in the
Okay.
day. Yeah, so again, if you refer to the Neil Adams pages, you can see that, yeah, you don't have any of that information. And then the inker would then go in and add that information. But if you look at the way pencils has evolved, and if you look at the examples in the C1 folder, you'll see pencilers nowadays, they're a lot tighter with their artwork. They're putting in all that information.
I think I'll show
Excuse
you
me.
this one. I think you're talking about, for instance, this Fantastic Four picture.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, this is Dale Kinone, I think his name is.
Hmm.
But this is an example. Like, if you have someone penciling, like if you compare that to the Neil Adams pages, like this guy has put in all that information: line weights, light source, feathering, gradients. It's all there. So when you have pencils this clean and this tight, a lot of publishers will kind of decide that they don't need the inker. They're just going to take this, put colors on it, and publish it as it is. You couldn't do that back in the day, but you can do it now, especially with digital. So this kind of is one of the things that has affected the inking industry, that pencilers are so good now in terms of how they render their work. That, yeah, like, I mean, I love this piece and I would love to ink it, but I don't even know where to start. Like, I don't know even how I can begin inking this unless I do ink wash or like Copics, you know. It's just, it doesn't need inking is the simple assessment. Even as an inker, I'm like, yeah, this doesn't need inking.
So what happened? Why did the drawing change? Was there some level, something that happened in school, in the art school, where they is it a new style? Because as you say, there's a lot of artists are now doing that, where there's no need for, as you pointed that out. Is there some shift that happened culturally within the drawing part of comics,
I
or
just, yeah, go on.
I was gonna say, or is it something to do with the digital? Because that looks like that was drawn by hand. That didn't look like it was done digitally.
Yeah, I mean, I do believe that. Yeah, I think that is drawn by hand. Yeah, that's drawn by hand, as far as I know. Just looking at it, like you can normally tell when it's penciled digitally, but with the advances in the digital technology, I have seen um, pieces created that look traditional, but they're
Right.
actually completely digital. So it's a little bit harder to tell. But this is an older piece, so I would say that this is um, definitely traditional. But I just see it as the evolution of the industry that we've got to this stage. You know, back in it's like with any industry, like things evolve, you know.
Right. Yeah.
If you look at the earliest paintings by humans, the cave paintings, you know,
Right.
and look where we are now, I think it's just the natural evolution of human beings that we get better and better at things. And so in terms of execution, art has gotten, in comics, has gotten a lot more sophisticated in some ways. I know some
Hmm.
people will, and indeed, people like uh, Jack Kirby, you know, all the artists that built this industry to start with, um, they're they're giants of the industry for sure, but they didn't draw to this level for comics. I think I have seen um, a piece by an old a golden age artist that is pretty tight and nicely rendered, but they didn't typically do that for comics simply because of deadlines. You know,
Right. Yeah.
they had deadlines, so they weren't able to do a Rembrandt on the page. You know, they had to do it as quick as possible. And because they're doing so many comics, they would put it, you know, do it as quick as possible and pass it on to the inker to finish.
Right.
So that's where the inker would take the pencils that they've been given, and they would add in all the details, the lighting, the shading, the textures, the backgrounds, all that stuff they would add in. But again, because pencilers these days have gotten more sophisticated in their execution and their rendering, yeah, it's just the way all things, in my opinion, sort of evolve. And that's
So
I guess.
So where do you see the future in inking with a lot of people doing self-publishing? It's and now we're in a place where where, as you said, a lot of things are digital. A lot of things are digital now. So where with that whole team of before, as you say, we talked earlier, there was a whole team of people that made comics. You had the
Yeah.
pencilers, the inkers, the finishers, the letterers, the colorists. Where do you see the future in the industry with that team aspect? Do you still see you still see, I guess, yeah, so where do you see the future?
Yeah, I mean, I still think there will always be a place for the team as long as you have publishers like Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, you know, all the big publishers. As long as we have them and deadlines, we will always have the team, because the time it will take one person to do all the work, you're not going to be able to output the number of comics if you had one person doing everything. Like, you need the penciler to move on to the next issue as quick as possible. If it took the penciler 4 to 6 weeks to produce 20 pages, and then it would take them another 4 weeks to ink, another maybe 4 weeks to color. What is that? So that's like 12 to 16, 18 weeks to produce a comic. They're not going to put out many comics a year,
Yeah.
but if they pencil it for 4 weeks, then they move on to the next comic and leave the rest to the team to get done. So I feel like as long as there are deadlines, as long as they're pushing out content, I mean, we see now that with Marvel and DC especially, there's sort of an explosion of comics.
Oh, it's
Like,
tons.
there
Yeah.
are so many Batman titles, so many Spider-Man titles, you know, so many Superman titles. I've lost track. Like, I've not read a comic in years because I've tapped out. I'm like, I
Yeah,
go into the shop and like, I don't even know where to start. There's just so many.
that's true.
And
We have,
so,
yeah, because I know, like, when I was collecting comics as kids, and on the back of the comic book they showed these are the 12 titles that Marvel has. And now if you go to marvel.com, Marvel Comics, they have 40 titles. It's
I don't
amazing.
even get me started. Like, I remember when, who was it? Especially when they do their crossovers.
Right.
Marvel, I tried following the original Sins that Marvel did some years ago.
Mhm.
I am a fan of Art Adams. So when he did the covers for the original Sin, it's like, I'm collecting them all. You know, I'm going Pokemon on this. But of course, I wanted to read it. And so I thought, okay, it's these, I think it was 8 issues. Yeah, I think maybe 8, 10, or 12 issues. I can't remember. So I thought, okay, I'll just collect them and that's it. I've got this awesome storyline. And then I looked on the shelf and it was like Spider-Man, Original Sin. And I'm like, what? And then there's like Fantastic Four, Original Sin. And I'm just like, do I have to collect them as well? Like, to know what's going on in this Original Sin storyline? Like, what? Like, no, I can't do it anymore. Just like, but yeah, and I think some time ago DC tried to, like, you know, it would normally, they would release an issue every month, and then I think DC tried to issue Batman every 2 weeks, And I know it went horribly wrong apparently, because like issues were delayed, like they just couldn't keep to that schedule. But you know, if they're gonna continue to produce that kind of output, you need a team.
Mm,
Because you want your, like, I'm sure everyone who has followed comics have come across those issues where the artist changes every few pages, you know, suddenly the inker changes every few pages, the colorist changes every few pages, and you're just frustrated. Like, I just want this one inker, I just want this one team, like. But the reason for that is because they're producing so much content, you know, they've got these deadlines they're really trying to keep to, and sometimes it's just not possible, you know, life happens. You know, an inker gets ill, or, you know, they've got a holiday scheduled, or, you know, whatever, you know, their kids get sick, or, you know, life happens, and there's no wiggle room for, you know, there's no contingency for if things go wrong.
mm.
So they have to bring in other people to fill in those jobs, like, because the deadline can't move. So you have to bring in other teams to work on those issues and get them out as quick as possible. Yeah.
So I do have somebody did ask a question also, is like any problem with carpal tunnel?
Yes. Yes. I had that. Funny enough, I don't think it was on the Dark Horse title. I think it was on the IDW. And I was only doing 5 pages, but because I had to do it really quickly, like,
Mm,
yeah, I got that. And it's better now, but there are exercises you can do to prevent that. And one thing I learned about that is the problem actually isn't in your wrist. It actually starts up here somewhere in your neck. So you kind of
mm.
have to exercise there. And it kind of radiates down that nerve to your hand. But there are exercises you can do that will relieve it. It's not something that is chronic, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah.
If you, as long as you exercise, when you feel like you're beginning to get that, you can go online and find these exercises, and they're very simple. They only take like 2-3 minutes to do. So if you just keep doing those, one of them is sort of, you have to like bend, you know, your hand back, and like you can press your hand against the wall as well, and you can do it like different ways to press it. It does hurt when you do it, but it does relieve the carpal tunnel. And it will go away if you do those exercises. But if you don't, and you keep continuing to strain your hand, and you just leave it, you know, then it will get to that point where you might need surgery. But you don't need to. It doesn't have to be that way. Just keep exercising your hands.
So we're getting to the top of the hour, so I got a few more questions for you.
Yeah.
One is I really wanted to talk to you about is if people wanted to learn more about inking, for instance. Uh, this has been eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
I've always academically thought about the importance of inking, but didn't really realize about what the flexibility and just the amount of work goes into it and how
Yeah.
important an inker is. So if people
Yeah.
want to learn more about inking, do you have any resources or any places that you would
Yeah.
be able to go?
I do actually. I kind of figured it would be a question, so I do recommend. I don't know, it might look backwards on your screen, I don't know. This is The Art of Comic Book Inking by Gary Martin, who is an amazing inker. He's one of my favorites. And this is published by Dark Horse as well. I think this is second edition. I bought it years ago. But yeah, that's one book you can find. And they actually have at the back, they actually have pages. Let me just grab one that you can practice on, which is really cool.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so just fold it away. And they've got different artists, like there's let's see, eight of them, all by different artists.
Okay.
Fold it out, ink it, and then at the front it will give you tips for inking. You can see here about, you know, different what is that, inking with a brush. So these are sort of like the strokes you can get with brushes. So yeah, lots of tools and tips. I'm not too sure of any, like another good one would be Richard Friend on YouTube. He's one of the top inkers in the industry. You can find him on YouTube. He does videos where he does inking. But I don't know many that actually, I don't know any dedicated places or resources apart from that book that actually teach or talk about inking. There might be, I'm trying to remember if DC did one, because I know they have a few books on coloring and on penciling. Um, Maybe not. Yeah. So it's not, inking is sort of an overlooked area. Like you find plenty of tutorials about how to color comics. Oh yeah, there are plenty of them on YouTube, but inking not so much.
Yeah.
But there are sort of some rules to inking. Where you put your line weights and all that kind of stuff. And I'm happy to answer questions. You can hit me up on Facebook, Instagram, and it's the ink pages right there in the corner somewhere. And I'm always happy to answer questions and point people to resources. The best thing is to go on DeviantArt. You'll find lots of pencils that you can get and do practice on. Again, ask the ink penciler, can I ink this? Usually it's a yes, I very rarely get a no. I have had a couple, but it's rare. They're more than happy to help.
Hmm.
And yeah, just get inking. I would say for me, when it comes to inking, your feathering has to be on point. That's the make and break as to of how good you are as an inker, like how you feather, like how you do that gradient from black to white using those strokes that I mentioned earlier. Yeah, I think those are my two recommendations. And yeah, just if you want to, you can always contact me. I'm happy to answer questions.
So you have you have an Instagram, and it's at the Ink Pages,
The
correct?
ink pages, yeah.
All right, and then you have a Facebook page.
Facebook, I DeviantArt. If you just Google the ink pages, it will show you everywhere I am. I'm not hard to find. Like just Google it. I'm there. You'll find me. But Instagram and Facebook are the best places to get me if you want to chat. I am on Twitter, but I hardly use Twitter. I keep opening an account and then I'm like, this is not for me. And then I go away and then I come back. I'm like, still not for me. But I'm trying to be more consistent on Twitter, but it's not a place where I hang out a lot. So Instagram is where I hang out the most, then Facebook. So you can find me there.
So what are your projects? What are you working on now?
I'm currently inking a comic for I don't like attempting names that I can't pronounce. It's Finem Mundi Publishing. And like I said, they're based somewhere in Germany, I think. So I'm doing 3 issues for them. I've finished issue 4, working on issue 5, and then after that 6. I'm writing my own comic, which is SH. That's a long process. So don't ask me when it's out because it's got a long way to go. And then, yeah, that's mostly it in terms of what I'm doing. There are some other little things I'm still doing, but those ones I'm just gonna, they're not really relevant right now. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I do see SH. So that's you have a Facebook
SH,
page for that. That's
yeah,
at the SH series, and we'll put a
yeah.
link on that as well for people that want to check that out. It looks like it's some pretty cool. Anything you want to tell us about that?
Where to start?
What's the
Um,
elevator pitch on it? Yeah.
oh God, I'm still working on the elevator pitch. I'm better at giving you the whole spiel than I am. It's a quick snippet, but I will say it's sci-fi, based like thousands of years in the future. It's something my younger brother and I came up with, like mid 90s. I think early mid 90s we came up with the idea, and we would come up with stories. And then years later, it's like, well, this is a story I want to actually tell. It's changed a lot since we both collaborated on it as kids. But I hope people enjoy it when it does come out. Um, it's going to be a big one, though. It's like I'm just breaking all the rules of comics. Like they tell you to start with a small story. Just start with a short
Yeah.
story. Don't start with a massive epic. And I'm just like, well, if I don't start now, it's never going to get done. So I'm going to start now.
So you have you have that your series that you're working on, your
Yeah.
SH series. You have, as you said, and people can find you on that. You've done some Dark Horse comics, you've done some IDW comics, and Ink Pages. Google Ink Pages. You're going to
Yeah.
find Jane through that.
Yeah.
And plus, you mentioned that you also are going to be at the London.
Yes, so there's a convention on the. Is this a leap year? I feel like it's a leap year.
It is a leap year.
Because because I'm pretty sure it's the 28th to the 1st, but it's 3 days. So I'm like, oh, okay. It's a leap year there. I didn't even think about that. It's the 28th to the 1st. I think at Olympia in London, here in London. So I'm going to be there with a table. Yeah. Also, I mean, if you're interested in inking, there's also the Inkwell Awards. That's a charity site though, and it sort of promotes the art form of inking. I don't know if they have tutorials on there, but people might be interested. And I think what's really great about the Inkwell Awards is that they used to do an annual challenge where they would have one penciler and loads of inkers inking that one drawing. So you can really see like just how much an inker actually does bring to the table. Like, I think we would be given two pencils. One is like loose and one is like tight. So, more detail, less detail. And to see how people would ink them, it really does highlight, what inkers do. It's not just tracing. There's a lot more to it. and you'll see that when you visit their website. So that's the Inkwell Awards.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And as I say, you'll be it looks like at the London Comic Con, Saturday 29th, the 29th of February to March 1st, Sunday, March 1st.
It's the 28th, which is a Friday. So it's the Friday to the Sunday. Yeah.
Friday to Sunday. Okay. Yep, the London Comic Con. And you can find Jane Ink Pages. Just Google Ink Pages.
Ink Pages. One word. It's all one word.
Throw in the Ink Pages. You put in the sometimes on it too. Okay.
Yeah. You have to remember that.
The Ink Pages. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Jane. This has been enlightening for me to learn more about the.
I certainly hope so. It's
All
probably
right.
one of the most underappreciated aspects of comics. So I'm glad people get to have a feel for what it's really like to ink.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you very much, and we'll look forward to talking to you again, and looking forward to seeing more of your SH series as well.
Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.